The next poem is about the birth of my own baby, my first child, due in about an hour, and I'm in a hospital in the city, walking up and down, looking out at the cars and the traffic lights, and I'm amazed that the ordinary life of the city continues while I am having the greatest adventure of my life so far. So the first verse looks back to that moment, that very great day, beautiful day. The second verse, 11 years later, the child is not yet a teenager, and she's asking, can she and her brothers go out after tea on a dark winter's evening to roller skate in the street outside the house? I say, no, it's dangerous. She gets very upset. Catrin, I can remember you, child, as I stood in a hot white room at the window, watching the people and cars taking turn at the traffic lights. I can remember you, our first fierce confrontation, the tight red rope of love which we both fought over. It was a square environmental blank, disinfected of paintings or toys. I wrote all over the walls with my words, coloured the clean squares with the wild, tender circles of our struggle to become separate. We want, we shouted, to be two, to be ourselves. Neither won nor lost the struggle in the glass tank, clouded with feelings which changed us both. Still I am fighting you off, as you stand there with your straight, strong, long brown hair and your rosy, defiant glare, bringing up from the heart's pool that old rope, tightening about my life, trailing love and conflict, as you ask, may you skate in the dark for one more hour?
I hope you enjoyed the introduction from Gillian Clarke, one of your identity poetry anthology poets, actually reading her own poem and telling you a little bit about the context surrounding it. So, Gillian Clarke was born in Cardiff in 1937. She spent most of her life in Wales. Her parents were both Welsh speakers and she speaks both English and Welsh. She uses many Welsh stories and myths in her work. She often writes about nature and her observations of people. Her first poems were published in 1970 and she has since written 3 collections of poetry. She edited the Anglo-Welsh Review from 1975 to 1984 and has taught creative writing in schools. She now works as a poet, freelance writer and broadcaster and is a lecturer at the University of Glamorgan. She has a daughter, Catrin, and 2 sons and lives on a small holding in Wales. She's an excellent website which I encourage you to visit, www.gillianclarke.co.uk, which includes notes on her poetry. If you do go to the website, you can email her questions about particular poems and she will actually answer your query, which I think is really nice. Most of this on her website is geared towards Welsh examination boards like WJEC, but is still really worth a visit. Yes, your question may actually even be added to the site if she enjoys it. She's kindly allowed people to feature some of her ideas on GCSE Bite-Sized, which I've pulled some of my notes from. You can listen to the SoundCloud link that I played at the start there, but you don't have to, unless you really have a hankering to actually click on the PDF and listen to it again yourselves. So some of the questions and answers on her website. She was asked, what's the poem about? And she said, why did my beautiful baby have to become a teenager? At least, I think that's what it's about. What is the tight red rope of love? The umbilical cord. So what's that old rope? The invisible umbilical cord that ties parents and children even when children grow up. I was also thinking of the image of a boat tied to a harbour wall. The rope is hidden, the boat looks as if it is free, but it isn't. So that's a beautiful metaphor for that kind of parent-child relationship there from Gillian Clarke. Couldn't it be the tug of war between teenager and parent? Brilliant! I hadn't thought of that. It proves that if you bring your own personal experiences to a poem, you find ever deeper layers of meaning in the words. Or about letting your child go? Even more brilliant. In the last lines is an image of the daughter asking to skate in the dark for one more hour. Isn't that the baby in the womb wanting to skate in the dark one more hour before being born? A beautiful, amazing question. You've seen something I didn't even see when I wrote the poem. It proves that poems are not carved in stone. Interpretations can change as the world changes. When Catrin was born, they didn't scan babies in the womb. Now we all know what a baby in the womb looks like, so your question gives the words new meaning. Nobody can stop you reading a poem in your own way, thank goodness. So, what did you mean by skating in the dark? Just that, children asking if they could stay out in the street skating as darkness fell. I chose the request an example of the sort of things that children want to do that mothers refuse. I chose it because it was romantic, poetic request, and I wanted something that showed it is beautiful and dangerous to be young. Doesn't in the dark mean that the mother and daughter have yet to explore their relationship? Sorry about that, I've just realised that I forgot to flick on to the next page, so that's me now. And then she says, wow, another one I hadn't thought of. Of course you're right, the language proves it. In the dark means not knowing something. What is the glass tank? The hospital. Do the changing traffic lights symbolise the progress of labour and changing relationships? Another clever idea I hadn't thought of. I thought I was describing ordinary life going on in the city, while inside the hospital, momentous events were happening in people's lives. What do you think about students analysing your poems and finding meanings you didn't intend? I'm grateful to you for reading them and for revealing to me what you find. Poets write instinctively and don't always see every possible meaning in the words they choose. If you find something and prove it with quotations, then it's there and you're right, and don't believe anyone who tells you otherwise. Could that old rope suggest the chains of DNA handed down from mother to daughter? It certainly could. When the poem was written, the genetic map had not yet been written, nor had the method of identifying people from their DNA been used. This proves that poetry and language move on and new meanings can be found. And I think that's a really interesting thing for her to point out, because it links her poem really nicely with Sinead Morrissey's genetics, which you will encounter at some stage as well. So looking at the poem, I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to talk to you about the form and structure. It is a first-person narrative point of view, which draws us in and then puts us in the role of the daughter with that direct address. There's two stanzas. The first is the past tense, and then the second is present tense, but you probably can't see it because of the way I've structured it, to try and fit it all on the one page. And this emphasises this parent-child dynamic. There are short sentences throughout that depict first the conflict of the birth as they both fight for individuality. The pauses throughout, created by caesura, symbolise the passing of years and how there's a new conflict between the mother and daughter. The use of enjambment emphasises the flow of the poet's thoughts. The irregular rhyme also emphasises the personal and self-reflective nature of the poem. It has an informal style, representing the emotions that are sometimes difficult to explain. Now if we move on to the significance of the title. It's her child's name, her own daughter's name. It is not mentioned again throughout the course of the poem, reflecting the universal truth of the poem. Alternatively, it could reflect that this bond between mother and child is so close that they don't need names, that it's almost integral to identity. And in many ways it is, because your name is so important and people can learn a lot about you based on your name. Situation, so the poem explores the theme of love and turmoil in the parent-child relationship. It centres around a conflict that seems to have escalated into fury rather quickly. The speaker conveys the feelings of love and affection along with the frustration, revealing the mixed emotions of her identity as a parent and the struggles of parenthood. There are two mirrored confrontations, the birth and the separation, where both mother and child struggle with these new identities bestowed upon them, the identity of mother and child now that she's finally giving birth, and the fight over skating after dark 14 years later, where both struggle with their respective roles and the dynamic at play. By the end of the poem, the reader can clearly understand the rationale behind the mother's side of the argument. Thus, the reader can enter into the mother's feelings. Though the mother is right by the end of the poem, she doesn't feel that she has won. Rather, she feels as though she has lost something. The daughter also clearly feels that she has lost. Somehow, the intensity of this argument has changed both the mother and the daughter. It was clearly a marked turning point in their lives and relationship. This highlights the importance of the parent-child relationship in shaping identity, which again is really interesting because that leads really nicely into comparing with, again, Sinead Morrissey's Genetics, or even maybe Larkin's I Remember, or even D.H. Lawrence's Piano. And you could, to an extent, compare it to the teacher-student relationship in Miss Tilsher's class, or even the role model child relationship in Simon Armitage's Kid. So you've got lots of lovely parallels and lots of different poems that this poem could be compared to. I've completely lost my place now. Yes, the importance of the parent-child relationship in shaping identity, and explores how tiny events can trigger emotions, which also really links to Piano, which we'll analyse at some point in the future. The mother continues to love and fight for the protection of her daughter, even when the daughter fights against it, giving her a defiant glare that leaves the mother feeling that something between them has changed forever. And now we're going to move on to our line-by-line analysis. So the first line, I can remember you, child. You've got that direct address to the speaker's daughter and the mother reflecting on the memory of the birth. As I stood in a hot white room at the window watching the people and cars taking turn at the traffic lights. So the assonance of stood and room and all the other o sounds throughout emphasises the labour pains and the claustrophobia as they both struggle to be separated in that birthing process. The adjectives hot, white emphasise the unpleasant, stifling atmosphere of the hospital and of giving birth itself. There's a kind of sterile, emotionless quality to the room, which contrasts with the struggle that she experiences, and that's shown through the symbolism of the colours, the white, and then later on, further on down, the red. So the white sterile ward with its white walls contrasting to the messy birth and the red blood. You've got your alliteration. In fact, I've coloured it in this kind of turquoise highlighter throughout the entire poem because it's rife the whole way throughout, and it emphasises the mother's anxiety, which continues throughout the poem, suggesting that even after the birth and the separation that birth brings, mothers are tied to their children through the worry that they feel for their child's safety, which is quite nice because the alliteration almost reflects that tugging of that rope that she talks about later. And again, as she said earlier, you've got this humdrum, the ordinary life of, people continuing on about their daily business, stuck in traffic, as her life is changing, her identity is changing so monumentally with the birth of her daughter. And then she says, I can remember you, our first fierce confrontation. So the repetition of that initial line emphasises the poignancy of the child's birth and the significance that it has had on impacting and shaping the mother's life and the mother's identity. First, fierce confrontation. You've got all these harsh consonant, fricative F sounds, recreating the heavy breathing and panting as she gives birth. The emotive adjective reflects the nature of their love. It's a fierce love, an unconditional love between mother and child. So having children makes you fiercely protective and changes your identity irrevocably. If we look at the noun confrontation, this emphasises how the birth is like a battle as they both fight for individuality and identity. There's also the suggestion that from even inside the womb, children fight with their parents, paving the way with that first confrontation, birth, for future confrontations. And this dynamic is a recurring part of the relationship and therefore integral to the identity of both mother and child. Red rope of love, which we both fought over, it was a square, environmental blank disinfected of paintings or toys. So red rope of love is a metaphor for the umbilical cord that emphasises the power of the mother-child bond, and you've got that contrast between the white sterile room and the red of the blood, or the red of the the passion and love of the mother. So it's this power of the mother-child bond that binds and gives life. It's also evocative of a boat anchor bringing the old rope from later in the poem. And then you've got the sterile, cold ward, bland and contrasting with the passion the mother feels for her newborn child as they battle to be physically separate yet forever emotionally tied in the birthing process. I wrote all over the walls with my words, so she's not literally writing all over the walls. It's a metaphor for her screams in labour and the intensity of the birth. Again, you can see that alliteration the whole way throughout, with the wild, tender circles of our struggle to become separate. So you've got your oxymoron there of wild and tender, the contrast in emotions that the relationship can bring, and the conflict stirred up in that birthing process. It's probably one of the most beautiful things, but yeah, you already know there's going to be conflicts from the get-go because parenting comes with struggles and it's hard, it's difficult. And that's reflected in the verb struggle. You've got struggle and separate, so you've got your alliteration or sibilance if you like, depicting Catrin's independence, and you've got this metaphor for writing depicts the pain and creation in giving birth, similar to the art of writing poetry. There's imagery of conflict emphasised through the sibilance. You've got your collective pronoun, we want, we shouted, to be two, to be ourselves. So you've got this conflict, you've got the collective pronoun emphasising how intense their struggle to be born and to give birth is. You've got the repetition of the collective pronoun we to show their simple but intense feelings and reveals the fight for individuality, but that even when the daughter is finally born, they will forever be tied because of that mother-child bond. So there's a lot of conflicting images or ambiguous images in this poem. You've got more alliteration and you've got this repeated t sound, to be two, to be ourselves. So that emphasises this struggle for independence and identity. Neither wins the battle of the birth, but both are changed forever. Neither lost nor won the struggle in the glass tank clouded with feelings which changed us both. So you've got this juxtaposition suggesting that parenthood changes you, that the love of a mother is revealed as we see her desire to protect her daughter, which is instilled since the birth, and comes across as overprotectiveness. Both mother and child feel that in their relationship, neither person can win sometimes. So again, that struggle. You've got more sibilant, struggle, still, stand, straight, strong, and fishbowl. That glass tank is a fishbowl, suggesting the claustrophobic connection that they have, that idea that maybe they're sometimes always on display and being watched, and the emotions experienced in their relationship as a result of this. You've got more assonance, you've got more internal rhyme with straight, strong, long, and sibilance emphasising the daughter's independence. You've got the concrete image of the daughter's appearance and her defiant glare, which is a great line. You've got this admiring tone depicted through the adjective defiant, despite the mother's desire to protect her daughter, which sometimes requires denying some of her requests. She admires the spirit and determination that her daughter possesses, even if it means that the defiance is a further conflict between them, another barrier between them. You'll have to excuse the little tiny numbers throughout. I took these from my teacher resource pack that I made, and they were numbers to guide me to refer to the footnotes at the bottom, but I've tried to make it more accessible, and that's just one that I've forgotten to remove. From the heart's pool, that old rope tightening about my life. Clarke's daughter constantly tugs at the bond which united them when she was born, shown through the personification of the heart to emphasise the strength of the bond despite that conflict, suggesting that maybe a mother's love is unconditional. It also shows that being a mother is such a monumental part of her identity now that she has experienced it. Trailing love and conflict. So again, you've got more juxtaposition, suggesting that a parent must fight with the daughter because she loves her and wants to protect her. And then finally, last page, as you ask, may you skate in the dark for 1 more hour. So you've got the independence of Catrin emphasised in the final line through the adjective dark, which has connotations of the unknown, hinting that the mother is unsure of her daughter's future because she is so independent. The mother worries about what this newfound independence means for the ties between their identities, not unlike Simon Armitage's Kid, although one is to do with hero worship, the other is to do with that parent-child relationship as opposed to a role model relationship. One is told from the perspective of a parent about their child, whereas the other is from the perspective of a child or adolescent about someone that they once admired. So do note that there are differences there too. The tone is admiring, even if she is frustrated with her daughter. Themes, time and the passing of it and how things change or transformations, family and conflict.